Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This past weekend, union bosses made no secret of the fact that they bankrolled the NDP convention through the loophole of advertising. Meanwhile, the Premier is nowhere to be seen on the strikes that are now bedeviling British Columbia, 145 days in the forest sector, 19 days at UNBC, and now an impending massive work shutdown in the Lower Mainland that will leave 1.4 million people waiting for a ride. The Premier, on all of these files, has done nothing. Commuters are about to get dragged into the fourth week of the transit slowdown, and it's about to get a whole lot worse for the more than 1 million people who'll be left standing by the roadside wondering, where is the government of British Columbia? And more pertinently, why do we have a Minister of Labour? So will the Premier do something about the transit strike?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I'm grateful that the Leader of the Opposition was spending some time contemplating the activities at our policy convention this weekend, where we passed a range of positive policies that are going to make life better for British Columbians. I'd go through that list with the member, but I know we've only got a half an hour. So what I'll do instead, Honourable Speaker, is with respect to the issues about transit in the Lower Mainland, I'm heartened to hear today that the parties are back at the table. Negotiations continue with respect to bus drivers in the Lower Mainland, and also mediation is in play with respect to SkyTrain. So free collective bargaining requires people to sit at a table and get things done, and that's exactly what's going on right now, this minute.
Leader of the Official Opposition on a supplemental.
Well, that's cold comfort to the people who are waiting for their care to arrive when they live in their own home and require caregivers to come and visit them. We heard on the radio this morning there are 10,000 people in that situation in the Lower Mainland. And the organizer for that in-home care said they expect the care service to go down from daily to every third day because the caregivers just can't get there without transit. This is a very real human aspect that is going to leave seniors lying in bed helpless because this government can't be bothered to even appoint a mediator in the transit strike. So this is coming home in a big way with real stories about real people, not some illusory idea of the bargaining table. Premier, it's time to focus on humanity, on people, on real lives, and save people the grief of a transit strike. So why can't this government appoint a mediator?
Premier.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and perhaps the Leader of the Opposition didn't hear my answer to his last question. There is a mediator in play with respect to the SkyTrain bargaining that's underway, and the parties that nothing's changed. I'll have to remind the member nothing has changed on that side of the House, because if you had made investments in transit in the 16 years you had to do that, you wouldn't have no challenges. But any conversion, Honourable Speaker, any conversion, no matter how late, to the importance of public transit is a conversion well worth waiting for. As I said in my first question, Honourable Speaker, and apparently they don't want to hear it again, but I'll repeat it, the parties are back at the table. We all know that the best agreements happen through free collective bargaining. It's happening right now, and again, I appreciate the members on that side don't understand, because Labour to them is just ripping up contracts.
Member North Vancouver Seymour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The North Shore has been affected by this transit strike for now over 3 weeks with the C-Bus. Now we are possibly going to have a full-blown strike that will actually negatively affect everybody on the North Shore. Commuters, small businesses, seniors, people with disabilities, they're going to be hit the hardest. Meanwhile, we have a parliamentary secretary responsible for transit who just happens to be the member for North Vancouver Lonsdale, and I haven't heard one word of support for her constituents during this strike. So my question is to the Premier, can you guarantee that this strike will not happen on Wednesday?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you.
Members. Minister.
Honourable Speaker, it always is stressful when so many people rely on public transit when they see there's a disruption. No one likes to see disruption in our public transportation system. More and more people rely on public transportation. And that's why I have been encouraging both parties to get back to the bargaining table, because that's where the deal will be made. That's where their problem to the issues will be solved. And that's where they could negotiate and come up with the solutions to the issues that dispute. Both the company and the union, they know their responsibility to the people that they serve, Mr. Speaker. And that's why they have agreed to get back to the bargaining table, because the best agreement comes when it's negotiated between the two parties rather than it's imposed by somebody.
Member North Vancouver Seymour on a supplemental.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. A full system-wide shutdown is pending this Wednesday, with no C-bus, no buses, nothing. Does the Parliamentary Secretary for Transit, as well as the Minister, who thinks mediation is a stupid idea, I might add, when are they going to make sure that the disruptions that have already occurred with the C-bus in the North Shore will cease to exist before Wednesday's proposed shutdown?
Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Honourable Mr. Speaker. You know, one thing is very clear. They have learned nothing in 2.5 years sitting on that side when it comes to the labour relations. And we are going to take no lessons from them when it comes to collective bargaining or labour relations in this province. Mr. Speaker, everything that they touched in 16 years when it comes to labour relations, they created a bigger mess than the problem itself. We respect collective agreement. We respect the free collective bargaining, Mr. Speaker. That is happening right now. Both parties are at the table. That's where the agreement will be reached.
House Leader, third party.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. On January 31st of this year, the government announced changes to the social workers working in Ministry of Children and Family Development. No longer are social workers in MCFD required to have a social work degree. I understand that this ministry faces a challenge in recruiting social workers. It is difficult work. Social workers in the ministry are often faced with unsustainable workload pressures, a highly emotional and draining work setting, and burnout is high. But surely lowering standards for such vital work is not the answer. We have a doctor shortage, but I don't hear anyone advocating that the answer just lies in hiring more people with basic first aid skills. My question is to the Minister of Children and Family Development. Given the vital nature of the work that social workers do and the significant powers that they have, why is it appropriate to lower the professional standards for social workers working in her ministry?
Minister of Children and Family Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for the question, because I'm always really happy to acknowledge the incredible staff that we have working for the Ministry of Children and Family. And I agree. I believe that our frontline workers have some of the toughest jobs to do in this province, and they work incredibly hard every day to support the families and the children that they protect. And I share the member's commitment to maintaining the high standards and professionalism of our ministry workers right across BC. And I believe that the member will also agree that many types of knowledge and lived experiences have value and importance, particularly when it comes to frontline work with children and families, and how important it is that ministry staff in BC reflect the diversity of communities that they serve. And that's why we made the changes earlier this year to the credentials and education criteria for frontline workers, not to lower it, but to ensure that the changes we have made open the door for people from a greater diversity of backgrounds to apply for frontline positions for the ministry. And it also enables us to open the door to a greater diversity of candidates, which is particularly important in Indigenous communities and other areas where recruitment has been difficult.
House Leader, third party on a supplemental.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And I'd like to delve into this a little bit, but I'll start with a quote from the BCGEU, who says, expanding the range of professionals working with children and families is one thing, but replacing highly educated and trained social workers with alternative professions is an entirely different matter. Also, the BC Association of Social Workers has made it clear what their views are, requesting clear protection of title, mandatory registration of social workers with the college, statutory scope of practice, and accredited social work education. The complex nature of child protection in social work, which includes the ability to enter a home without warrant, requires highly educated and skilled professionals. The lowering of standards is arguably a step backwards to the goal of serving BC's children and families. Rather than lowering the standards, why is the minister and this government not focusing on investing in education and creating opportunities to encourage and allow more people, especially Indigenous people, to earn social work degrees so that they can practice to the professional standard that all of us would expect when it comes to the protection of children in this province?
Minister, Children and Family Development.
So thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to correct the member. We are not lowering the standard. The assessment process remains the same. Applicants are still required to meet the same competencies and must demonstrate equivalent skills and experience before they are even hired. Once hired, employees have to take additional training that covers interviewing kids who have been either physically or sexually abused, preparing kids to go to court, and other aspects that aren't covered by degree programs. On-the-job training is under direct supervision of an experienced social worker and a supervisor. And employees also have to complete a 6-month probation period that tests the classroom teaching in the real world. Our frontline social workers have a really important job to do, and they continue to be held at rigorous standards. And we've also created a working group, the Social Worker Program Officer Working Group, which with the stakeholders, such as the BC Association of Social Workers, the BC College of Social Workers, the BC Government Employees Union, and representatives from post-secondary institutions right across the province. And the working group has already met a number of times. They're developing terms of reference, and they're working together to jointly explore the strategies for recruitment and retention of social program officers. And I think it's important to note that myself and other social workers, senior social workers, people that work in the ministry, go out across the province and talk to people that are going to school, that are learning in the classrooms to become social workers, about what an incredibly important job this is, how important it is to the children and kids in this province, families in this province who need the supports they need. And we go in and talk to them about what an incredible job it is. And I'm happy to say we are recruiting more social workers, and at the same time making sure that the kids in the province that need these services are getting them.
Member for Prince George Valemount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My community is frustrated and worried about the ongoing strike at UNBC. Every single day that it continues, the risks of students losing a semester grows. This is what Madison McCann and 3 of her fellow first-year students wrote to the Minister of Advanced Education, and I quote, "This situation has left us both frustrated and completely turned off from advanced education. Our entire semester Quite possibly even our entire year is in jeopardy, end quote. Well, in the Lower Mainland, soon some students won't be able to get to their classes. In my community, our students can't get to their classes because there are none. The Minister of Advanced Education has been completely silent. Will she stand up today and tell Madison and all of those students who have written to her exactly what she has done to ensure that these students do not lose a semester of their education?
Minister, Advanced Education, Skills and Training.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, and I appreciate finally getting a question from the official opposition about education. It took 28 months and 19 days. It took 28 months and 19 days.
Members. Members.
Honourable Speaker, I became the minister in July 2017. As soon as I became minister, the first thing that I did was visit all 25 public post-secondary institutions in 21 days. UNBC was one of them, and from day one, Honourable Speaker, I've been taking action to invest in students. I have received the emails from the parents and the students and faculty that care deeply about UNBC. But make no mistake, the official opposition are fear-mongering. They're creating this story.
Members, please allow the minister to answer the question.
Honourable Speaker, they're creating a narrative. They're creating a narrative that is not true. The parties were bargaining over the weekend. The parties are negotiating. That is a part of a free and collective bargaining process. So I respect the fact that the member opposite wants to create this narrative that I don't care about UNBC. I've been there 6 times investing in students, 6 times, and the member opposite was there because we invited her to celebrate how important UNBC is to the north.
Member for Prince George Vilmont on a supplemental.
Well, let's be clear. This discussion is not about how the minister feels or about her reputation. This is about getting students back in their classrooms. She's been absent. We asked questions last week, and just because she doesn't get up doesn't mean the questions weren't answered. Let's be clear, this government and this Labour minister has tools that can assist in the bargaining process. He just won't get up and use them. And meanwhile, every day, more and more students are writing to this minister, writing to this premier and saying, do something. Let's listen to another one. Just this morning, I got another email from a student saying she would not be able to finish her application to veterinary school. Why? Because the transcripts won't be ready, because the semester won't be finished. The minister can stand in this House and deflect all she wants. She needs to get up, do something, and help resolve this issue today. Let's hear her answer on what she's actually done.
Minister.
Question. There's a few layers to that. First of all, our government respects the bargaining process, and the parties were at the table this weekend. I am getting updates regularly about the negotiating process. They are going to reach an agreement. I expect the parties to set aside their differences, reach an agreement for the best interests of UNBC, for the entire community. But while I have a chance to stand up and talk about a government that actually cares about post-secondary education, because where were they? The first thing we did the first thing we did, Honourable Speaker, when we formed government was we brought back free adult basic education because they cut it. They turned their back. But if we want to talk about UNBC now has for the first time a civil and environmental engineering program in their backyard for the first time. But as a point of fact, Honourable Speaker, the member opposite had every chance to deliver when she was in government and she failed. So, you know what? I will do everything I can to invest in UNBC, but at this moment in time, let's get the parties to the table to get a good agreement, fair agreement for UNBC.
Member Nechako Lakes.
That was an incredible example of a minister who doesn't care about the future of children. That's really shameful. Students are losing their courses. That is just unacceptable. But I tell you, there's another thing that's going on that is unacceptable right now. Mosaic Forest Management just sent 2,000 forest workers home today. Along with the strike with the USW and Western Forest Products that's gone on now for 5 months, with another 3,000 workers out in the cold and thousands more being impacted on the island. The Mayor of Port McNeill says, and I quote, "It's killing our communities and it's heartbreaking to see what is going on or what it's doing to the people. We are struggling and reaching the point where it is going to be very difficult to come back from," end quote. The Premier has done nothing. The Forest Minister is doing nothing. When will this government take the coastal industry serious and start providing some help to the struggling families and communities?
Minister of Forests, Lands, Natural Resources and Rural Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, Mosaic, I was disappointed to hear that they curtailed operations due to current market conditions was their reasoning. Our hearts go out to the contractors and employees that have worked through Mosaic for their livelihoods. We have been in touch with Mosaic to ensure that they know about the supports that are available through our retraining programs offered through the ministry and through the Advanced Education Ministry for forest workers undergoing these kind of changes. We also know that with Western Forest Products, the collective bargaining process is underway at the bargaining table. Both sides have taken upon themselves to engage a private negotiator, Vince Reddy, to try to settle the differences between the two parties. In the meantime, it's incumbent upon us, Honourable Speaker, as a government to look to the long term to make sure that when these labour disruptions are over and when market conditions are better, that there is wood available, and we're driving domestic logs to domestic production on the coast and on the island with our policies, and we're also making sure that fibre is more available coming out of the woods for more value added, and that's the future of the industry, and that's the future we want to see for rural and coastal communities when it comes to forestry.
Nechako Lakes on a supplemental.
The reality is this government's policies are driving the coastal forest industry into the ground. There won't be anybody left to be able to log at this pace. I traveled up the island and I spoke with people being impacted, seeing the homes up for sale, vehicles being repossessed, food banks and other service providers are stretched to the limit, not being able to keep up, and families are leaving these small communities never to return. Jessica McLaughlin of the Port McNeill Chamber of Commerce said this, and I quote, it's not people trying to fearmonger, it's a reality of what's happening in our town right now," end quote. Enough is enough. This coastal forest industry needs help, and the Premier needs to show some leadership. Step in, use the tools you have, and help resolve this dispute. Will you take action?
Minister of Forests, Lands, Natural Resources and Rural Development.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. We on this side are a government that puts people and communities first. Unlike the previous government, Honourable Speaker. Unlike the previous government, Honourable Speaker, who put the people at the top first. Honourable Speaker, the member talked about realities. Well, let's talk about some realities. Between 2003 and 2017 in the coast, log exports increased by 155%, Honourable Speaker. Let's talk about another reality. Between 2003 and 2017, lumber production decreased on the coast by 45%. Let's talk about another reality. Between 2003 and 2017, jobs in the coastal forest sector decreased by 40%. That was under their watch. That's not going to happen under our watch because we care about rural communities.
Member Abbotsford West.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, hundreds of thousands of commuters are wondering how they're going to get to work or school in the face of labor disruptions. University students are worried they are on the verge of losing an entire term because of strike action, and as we've just heard, things just get worse and worse in the forest sector. And what has the government's response been? Silence. Absolute silence. Yep. Well, silence until this weekend, actually, Mr. Speaker, when the Premier and his colleagues were thanking the who's who of the big union bosses for their generous advertising support of the NDP convention. The BCGEU, CUPE, HEU, BC Building Trades, they were all there. They were all there supporting the NDP with their advertising dollars. How, Mr. Speaker, can British Columbians have any confidence that the NDP government will fulfill their duty to protect the public interest when they are so clearly beholden to big labour and won't even appoint a mediator without the approval of the big union bosses?
Minister of Labour.
Mr. Speaker, we watched this government when they were in action for 16 years. They hate workers, they hate unions who represent them, Mr. Speaker. We respect workers, we value the work that they do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that's why Mr. Speaker, that's why one of the first action of this government was because they were beholden by their donors and their friends at the high places. We got rid of the big money from politics. That was one of the first actions we did. Mr. Speaker,
Members. Members, we risk not having an opportunity for a supplemental by the member for Abbotsford West.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, there's a litany of there are half-baked ideas that never work in those 16 years when it comes to labor relations. Mr. Speaker, let's start with teachers. They talk about teachers. Let's start with teachers. They tore up. Obviously, truth hurts, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to hear it.
Members, please allow the minister to answer the question.
Mr. Speaker, they tore up their collective agreements that followed by 14 years of litigation all the way to the Supreme Court of Canada. Mr. Speaker, the Supreme Court of Canada had to tell them that their actions were illegal and go fix it. Mr. Speaker, their hate for workers is the result that people right now are frustrated. They're trying to make up for all the losses and the neglect and the ignorance by their side of the government. They were on this side. Now they are trying to say, we need to get up and we need to be respected again. This is a government that respects those workers. We do respect the free collective bargaining. We will not tear up a collective agreement that was legally negotiated between the parties.
Member Abbotsford West on a supplemental.
Well, that was a remarkably incomprehensible answer, Mr. Speaker. But it does actually lead to a supplemental. How much? How much in advertising dollars did the NDP actually take from the union representatives that they're not supposed to be taking political donations from, Mr. Speaker?
That's a good question.
The minister stands up and proclaims purity, and at the same time we hear that these union bosses are handing over advertising dollars. Well, how much? And in the midst, Mr. Speaker, of negotiating their latest advertising contract, did the minister or the premier ever get around to actually thinking about appointing a mediator so that the people that rely on buses to get to work will know that there will be buses running on Wednesday? The Premier and his minister and his colleagues may think it's convenient to skirt the rules by redesignating donor dollars as advertising dollars, but what British Columbians expect, Mr. Speaker, is a government that takes their public responsibilities truly seriously and will ensure that they use the tools to make sure the buses are running and that kids are getting to university and not losing an entire term because this minister and this government aren't doing their job.
Attorney General.
Mr. Chair, the member.
Mr. Bentley.
Members. Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. And now the member is making some pretty serious accusations about the BC NDP. I can advise the member that the party says that they worked with Elections BC, but if the member has a complaint, he knows where to file it with the Independent Office of Elections BC.
The bill ends question period. Premier.
On a point of order, Honourable Speaker. During question period, the member for Richmond-Steveston and the member for Vancouver-Colchana used unparliamentary language, and I'm very confident they'll do the honourable thing and withdraw.
Member Kelowna Lake Country.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to introduce a petition from 14,547 BC residents, mostly from the Rutland neighbourhood of Kelowna. The petitioners request that the development at 130 McCurdy Road in Kelowna be ceased until public consultation occurs, perhaps looking into more suitable potential uses for the property.
Thank you, Member. Member Parksville Qualicum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition asking for government to modernize the scope of practice for denturists to improve patient care with modernization of services in the safest manner for the public.
Member Richmond Queensborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to present a petition signed by 6,600 British Columbians who support the use of Class 5 driver's licenses for people who wish to work for ride-hailing companies in British Columbia.
Member Peace River North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to introduce a petition of nearly 1,800 signatures from my constituents in the Red Creek subdivision, located just north of Fort St. John and areas of around Fort St. John. I want to thank Jim Little, Andy Ackerman, and Joyce Smith for the work they did on this. This area is heavily used year-round,